A very warm welcome to Cafe Palestine, which is we haven't had a Cafe Palestine for a long time, not since probably last September. So it's a particular pleasure to be with you all again, because Cafe Palestine feels, to me at any rate, to have been a really important part of our way of participating, communicating, remaining in solidarity with our colleagues, both in Palestine and worldwide. So it's lovely to be back with you again. And I hope it'll be the start of a few more Cafe Palestines. And we have a really interesting project and three wonderful presenters who are going to speak to us this afternoon. Just a couple of points. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. And if you put a question in the chat, and you may want to just make a comment on the chat. So if you just highlight a question with a Q, so we'll know that that's a question and not a comment. And I'm sure people don't need by now to be reminded to mute yourselves during the presentation. And as Martin has already said, we are recording this session. So our presentation is three researchers from the Institute of Community and Public Health from Birzeit University, and I will introduce Suzanne, Joka and Hannah in a bit more detail later on. I just wanted to say something about the really fantastic, pioneering, innovative role that the Community and Public Health Institute at Birzeit has played. Its foundations are based on the social and political determinants of health, of understanding health and disease in context, and as phenomena that take shape over the life course, and also on the necessity of intersectoral collaboration and community participation in the promotion of health. And I think taking the wider context into account has always meant that the Institute has needed to pursue a path that cuts across the grain of much conventional research. And that has always been, in this highly politicized context, a risky endeavor. In the mental health field, I think the Institute has been incredibly bold in its insistence on engaging with social suffering at a political and social level, as opposed to merely individualized models of trauma, which inevitably occlude or erase this wider context. And among the pioneers in the Institute has been, of course, Rita Jackaman. And in the field of mental health, academics, including Rita and William Hamoude, have pioneered research measures that include, and to quote from a 2018 publication, humiliation, deprivation, insecurity, and distress, among other manifestations of the ill health accompanying the invisible wounds of war. And for me, that's a very helpful quotation to frame the project that we're going to hear about. Because I think in the Get to Know Us project that Joka, Suzanne and Hannah will be speaking about, we can see all these dimensions in the narratives of the participant. And this wonderful book, which I will hold up so that hopefully people can see it, and the details of the book will be available on the chat. And I think here in this project, we can discern the complex interplay between subjective experiences of mental distress, but also the infiltration into the psyche of all the complex layers of discrimination occasioned by military occupation, persistent lack of safety in public spaces, violent intrusions into private spaces, fragmentations of communities, and unpredictable access to vital resources, such as medication. The approach has much in common with narrative and liberation psychology perspectives that many of us in the UK and worldwide are familiar with, where the emphasis is on collective experiences, which can help overcome loneliness, isolation, and shame, and which include calls for social justice as a means of asserting agency. And just to make sure that we also locate this approach within our own context, we know from the UK experience how much the factors of poverty, of discrimination, poor housing, social isolation impact upon mental well-being. So I'm certain we'll find many points of connection between the different contexts. So now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers. Suzanne Mitwali is an academic researcher at the Institute of Community and Public Health, and she's the assistant coordinator of the master's program. Her main research interest is mental health, and she's worked for many years on interventions with the community-based rehabilitation organization. She's been involved in research projects at the Institute, including women's health, population health, child health, and occupational health. Her current research interest is participatory research with people with mental health issues, as we're going to learn about. Yoko Rabia is another academic researcher at the Institute, and her main field is social psychological health of populations in context of military occupation and human insecurity, with a specific interest in community-based intervention. As well as her work in Palestine, Yoko has also conducted qualitative field research with local researchers in Benghazi, Libya, and Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. She strongly believes that participatory action research is crucial to understand and work towards better social conditions for people who are stigmatized or looked down upon by others in society. Hannah Kiesler is a professor in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at King's College London. She's an anthropologist with a long-standing interest in the field of mental health. She investigates how systemic violence, ethnic conflict, and complex emergencies intersect with health and mental health outcomes. She conducts ethnographical research on the impact of war and trauma on women in Kosovo and what it means for persons with mental health problems to live and participate in their respective communities in Palestine. Refugee mental health in the UK and humanitarian and mental health interventions in fragile states. So this is an incredible richness of experience that we have to draw upon from our speakers. And I really look forward to I'd like to invite Hannah, Yoko, and Suzanne to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bryn and also Martin for having us. Thank you for everyone in the audience who has joined us. Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing the slides. So Suzanne is going to operate the slides. So very, very thankful for this. It's just wonderful that you have us, that you came to listen to our work, to our project that we are very passionate about. We entitled the presentation just like we titled the book, Get to Know Us, Our Lives with Mental Illness in the Palestinian Community. So the book was produced not only by Yoko Rabia and Suzanne Mitwali, but also we had research assistants from Noor Hamoudeh, who is the sister of Wiam Hamoudeh, who was mentioned just before, and Ranim Amra. It's really important to mention this research assistance because it has been incredibly helpful to work with these two women and have them as sounding boards. It was just like an incredible sort of community that we had. But most importantly, we co-produced this work with a group of people with severe mental illness who gave themselves a sort of group author name, group of friends with mental illness. And we're presenting also on behalf of them and with them. And the book has also been co-authored with the Palestinian Counseling Center, and maybe just a few words about them before we start. The Counseling Center is a long-standing institution in the occupied Palestinian territory. It was established in the early 1980s. It has pioneered really an interdisciplinary approach to psychosocial support, mental health interventions and care, awareness raising, capacity building, and also research. It serves the wider population, but really focuses on marginalized groups, children, young people, women, families from poorer sort of backgrounds also, but also people with severe mental illness. And they were really the ones who introduced us to this group of friends with mental illness who we then ended up working with. Next slide, please. Thank you, Suzanne. So from 2017 till 2022, basically, we worked on this project together. Joke, Suzanne, and I worked with this group of people with severe mental illness that was convened by the Palestinian Counseling Center. As Gwyn told you already, it was a thoroughly sort of participatory project that resulted in the book Get to Know Us, Our Lives with Mental Illness in the Palestinian Community, which you can see here, the title page on the slide. But before we go on to talk more about the sort of introduction to the book, the background, the work itself, I would like to read the opening words of our co-authors. So the book starts with the following quote: "In the community, we're called crazy. We want you to know that we aren't. We're mentally ill, but not crazy. This book is an invitation for you to get to know us and to bust your negative attitude towards mental illness. This is needed because the existing fear and false ideas around mental illness lead to unjust exclusion and discrimination of people like us in society." So together we aim to understand what community integration and participation of people with severe mental illness means in the context of Palestine. And we use different approaches, so participatory action research with a group of people with severe mental illness, but also ethnography and qualitative interviewing with other people suffering from severe mental illness, as well as their family members, professionals working in this field, so ranging from psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, to counselors. And through this kind of work, we try to get a more holistic understanding of the lives of those affected. And this project formed part of an even bigger project called Mental Health and Justice. And this was a Wellcome Trust-funded multidisciplinary research initiative that addressed public policy challenges that arise at the interface where mental health and mental health care interact with principles of human rights in the context of war and peace. So, who are we? And this is the next slide. Wonderful, thank you. So, as I said, our research brought together expertise of 10 persons with lived experience of severe mental illness, researcher from Birzeit University, so that's Suzanne Mitwali and Yuka Rabaya, myself from King's College, and practitioners from the Palestinian Counseling Centers. And those among us with lived experience of mental illness have decided to call themselves, as I said, a group of friends with mental illness. The reason to have this group name was that real names were not an option due to the pervasive stigma and discrimination against those with severe mental illness in the community. And of course, again, this is not just an issue that people in Palestine face. This is a worldwide concern. that people and their families with severe mental illness face just around the world. So since many years, this group meets regularly in a rehabilitation center run by the Palestinian counseling centers. And these meetings sort of take place once a week. They tend to follow a set routine of planning the day, some physical exercise, socializing, and depending on the day, creative projects as well. And this is sort of where we tapped into at the end of the session. There's some cooking together and eating together. So it's really quite a nice space. And the group consists of 3 women and 7 men who are aged between the mid-20s and early 70s, so quite a wide age range, and suffer from diverse mental illnesses, such as, for example, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, but also post-traumatic stress disorder. However, it's important to say that it was not that we didn't relate to people through their diagnosis. That this is not how they wanted us to relate to them, but rather to relate to one another sort of socially, relationally, beyond these sort of diagnoses. The diagnosis somehow didn't matter in this project. I think this is important to say. And now we're delving into the presentation. So here's a bit of an outline. We want to tell you about our work with the group and give you insights into the various aspects. So we will start by talking about actually sort of delving right into the content of the book, the experiences of community inclusion and participation as they were described by the group of friends with mental illness. Then we want to embed or sort of situate these experiences and stories in the legal context, because community inclusion and participation is in fact a human right. It's not a luxury as such. And within this context, we will then talk about our way of working, how we explored community inclusion and participation together, and related to this, the ethical and practical challenges and opportunities that we faced. We will end the presentation with a bit of a call out to you to help us with the dissemination and also further engagement with the book. The way we're going to present is that Yoke Rabaya will talk about the first 2 points, sort of the experiences of community inclusion and participation and the human rights aspects. Suzanne will talk about our way of working. I will pick up on the ethical and practical challenges. Then we'll come to a close and hopefully have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'm now handing over to you, Yoke. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So together we explored what living and participating in the Palestinian community means to those with lived experience, with a focus on the notions of community life, living with mental illness, equity, spare time, and the rights to medication and work. Let us provide you with some insight into what we discovered together. So indeed, oh, wait, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Community, right? So when thinking with the group about community, we realized that community is really a very complex idea consisting of various components of institutions, activities, values, history, and culture. The group had positive as well as negative thoughts when exploring the notion of community. Positively, they said, it brings people together through socializing, providing mutual help and support, and by being politically active. Yet, community was not easy to navigate when experiencing mental illness. Group members sometimes experienced it as unjust, controlling, oppressive, and intolerant. Most participants described having been mocked and ridiculed and being called Majnoon, that means crazy. One member is quoted in the book as saying, "We are not well integrated in the community. This makes us feel uncomfortable. And we keep thinking, why are we not like them? We can be like other people, but they don't allow us." The Israeli military occupation and related violence further impacts on community inclusion negatively. Just like other Palestinians, our group members are regularly exposed to the general violence of the Israeli military occupation, including movement restrictions due to checkpoints, the raiding of their homes and villages, being shot at, injury, imprisonment, and torture. Some of the group members who had experienced imprisonment and torture traced the beginning of their illness back to those experiences. This, they write, has left us physically and mentally scarred for life. They also describe how the military occupation reduces their radius of social interaction and community participation further as they avoid certain places where they feel unsafe. In terms of protection, families play an important role as they try to shield their family members with psychosocial conditions from encounters with the Israeli military. Indeed, the family home was the primary communal space where people with mental illness could participate while receiving care and support. However, also the extent of involvement in family activities was depending on several factors, including the perceived severity of the illness, family attitudes, gender, and the nature of the occasions. Some felt they could easily participate in family events, while others complained that their families failed to invite them out of shame and worried that people might ridicule them. One of the women of the group said, "I don't like it when I am left at home to watch television when my family goes to a wedding. I like going out too. I like to talk to people, and I like it when people ask me questions." Social life outside the home was mainly in the neighborhood. Depending on the severity of their illness condition and economic status, men could go to local cafes, to the mosque and market, where they could meet friends and socialize, while women's social life tended to be more confined to neighbors or family members. Most participants complained, though, that they had lost friends since the onset of their illness, as these friends could not make sense of their health conditions, or they felt ashamed to be seen in public with someone who was widely considered Majnoon, crazy. Particularly painful was the experience of being considered unemployable, even though many felt that paid work was crucial for their well-being, as well as for their financial and social standing. One of the men in the research group said, "People who have schizophrenia, like me, can hear voices, and I still hear them. But when I talk, I don't hear voices. It is when I am alone that I hear them. Work and medication ease these voices, but work makes them actually go away." Yet finding paid work was challenging due to various forms of discrimination. This could include being refused employment if they disclosed their mental health diagnosis, or being dismissed from work when they experienced a relapse, or even simply having to quit because of distrust or hostility from their colleagues. To be able to function in society, group members emphasize the importance of medication in the book. Yet they explain that the side effects of the medication could decrease their ability to commit to work duties and their social interaction. They write, "Besides making us feel good, it can also make us feel tired, dizzy, less able to move, and it can make us gain weight. At the same time, medication is often not available in the Ministry of Health clinics, and that forces people with mental illness to pay for it out of pocket at pharmacies. The situation can become even worse when the medication is not available at the pharmacy, which means people in need have to go without it, sometimes for months on an end." A man writes in the book, "When I don't get the medication, sometimes I end up destroying things, or I become aggressive with my family. And because of that, I warn people to stay away from me when I cannot find the medication. I need to be able to take my medication. When I don't find it, I am very worried. But when I have the medication, I am fine. I can work and earn money. To have the opportunity to participate in community life requires for the community to treat people with mental illness equitably. This, our group members' right, involves creating spaces where they can feel safe, respected, and valued. With irony, one of them said something along the lines of, "We know that we cannot be pilots or CEOs of big companies, but this doesn't mean that we cannot work or contribute to community life." All agreed that they require equitable access to education, work, and healthcare. And just like the shorter kid in the picture, they may require a little extra support to be able to take part in community life, just like everybody else. It is the limitations of their illness which must be taken into account. We now come to the second part of our presentation, community participation as a human right. As we first focused on the lived experience of our co-researchers, we like to give you now a bit of the legal background. While community inclusion of people with severe mental illness in contexts of war is challenging, it's not a luxury, but a human right. The human right to community inclusion in contexts of peace and war is outlined by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In its Article 19, living independently and being included in the community, the Convention states clearly, states parties to the present Convention recognize the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live in the community with choices equal to others, and shall take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment by persons with disabilities of this right and their full inclusion and participation in the community. Palestine is signatory to the CRPD since 2014 and should therefore actively promote disability rights, including for people with severe mental illness. And while efforts in this direction are underway, they are challenged by the ongoing conflict and Israeli military occupation. And that includes human rights violations, which are regularly committed against people with severe mental illness, as they are subjected to targeted killings, injuries, and torture by Israeli occupation forces. And it also includes violence and intentional de-development of infrastructure and essential services, which has been linked to mental health challenges among the Palestinian population overall. And even though the need is so high, professional community support for people with mental illness has been limited, including the provision of appropriate and sustainable mental health care. However, we still know very little about how people with severe mental illness and their families experience this situation. And our illustrated storybook is therefore a valuable resource. It provides important insights directly from those who experience living in community with severe mental illness, and has been fully co-produced following the disability rights motto, "Nothing about us without us." And I will now give over to our colleague Suzanne Metwalli, who will present the next part of our presentation. She will speak to you about how we worked on the book together with the group of people with lived experience of mental illness.
Thank you, Hannah and Yoka. So yeah, we worked in 3 phases over 3 consecutive years. Each year, we conducted a series of 10 to 12 meetings with our group, our co-researchers. The meetings had a set routine. So we start with attendance taking, then developing a plan for the day, some physical exercise, group work on the research theme of the day, cooking and shared lunch, and then planning for the following week. As the group of friends with mental illness worked as co-researchers on the project, they were paid for their work. So phase 1 of our working with the group consisted of weekly meetings over 3 months at the Palestinian Counseling Center, Rehabilitation Center, to research different aspects of what living and participating in the community means. At the end of each session, the topic and method of discovery was decided for the next week. To unlock their stories and gain insights, we worked creatively, having pens, papers, post-its, watercolors, recorders, and cameras to hand. We also visualized feelings through collages, images, color schemes, and drawings, as you can see in the slide. So our group members also interviewed each other and filled out the charts to compare their experiences. And we went together with them on community walks to explore and reflect on their surrounding together. And following the intensive 3 months of working with our group, the researchers summarized the findings by bringing them into the shape of book chapters. We were lucky at the time to find the famous Palestinian artist Amir Shomali, who was willing to draw the illustration based on a style that the group had decided on. The style was to be realistic and not cartoon-like, to make sure that readers will understand that what is written is based on real people's experiences and not a cartoon story. And this was, of course, their demand. And phase 2, which comes in the second year of our working with the group, consisted of another round of weekly meetings over 3 months, during which we discussed, revised, rewrote, and redrew the book content. Every week, we worked together through one chapter, discussing the sentences and meanings and finding out whether what was written resonated with people's everyday experiences. This was hard work, but of course enjoyable, especially for those who were severely cognitively impaired or had a hard time concentrating. It was enjoyable for us, but it was a bit hard. We moved through the pages sentence by sentence to then summarize what we heard in our own words. Group members provided each other with support throughout this process to keep frustration to a minimum. At some point of phase 2, the group members voiced their desire to start disseminating initial findings and advocating for their rights. So we created together with them advocacy cards spelling out rights and demands for community inclusion and participation on an equal basis as others. And you can see that from the slide, one of these cards, which says that we have the right to go out of the house without people looking at us strangely. So we produced many cards with them based on their rights and what they see as their rights. Then we distributed the cards in public places such as bakeries, pharmacies, cafes, and schools. Importantly, we also gave presentations at the Open University to full lecture halls of students and at the local library. Together with them, we also organized meetings with experts, such as the director of the mental health unit of the Palestinian Ministry of Health, psychiatrists, and social workers. This kind of labor did not come easy, considering that our members had to enter spaces where they often feel stigmatized and even mistreated. It came, therefore, as a pleasant surprise when they were welcomed warmly and with respect. And now we come to phase 3. Phase 3 included fewer meetings and was focused on finalizing the book and exposing it to the real world via focus group discussions, which we co-designed and carried out together. Invited participants were mental health practitioners, activists, and students who explored and discussed the book, made recommendations for changes, and brainstormed how they could possibly use a book like this as a resource. Through the joint reflection with them, we further improved the book and finally started printing the final Arabic and English versions of the book. It is with this accomplishment that we now invite you to acquire hard copies of the book or use the PDF that is freely available from our website. And our website is shown on the screen, and Hannah posted our emails on the chat. So if you like hard copies. After all, the whole point is that those who do not know will get to know people living with mental illness. Now my colleague Hannah will continue with the ethical and practical challenges.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. As you could, I think, already hear from what Suzanne was presenting, and Suzanne said it was challenging and enjoyable at the same time. And this is, I think, how all of us felt throughout this process, because of course such work does come with ethical challenges that we had to navigate throughout this process. And to get this book right, because the book was a labor of love for us. It was something that is very close to our hearts. We really wanted to get it right. And what that meant was for us to move really quite slowly to make sure that everyone was on board, that everyone could have their voices heard and also make an impact, no matter where they were in their lives. So this kind of working was both then joyful, but could also have its frustrating sides. So for example, the group of people, the group of friends with mental illness, they appreciated it, but at the same time, they were really quite sort of gung-ho to get their hands on the book. They couldn't wait for us to finally finish it, to have it printed, to have it online. And so sometimes it was a bit frustrating that it just took so long, that we always wanted to get it right, making sure that it really reflected their views and understandings. Similarly, it was a completely new way of working for the artist, Amar Shomali, who had to learn a new iterative way of working. And at some point, he told us laughingly, and we have the quote here because we thought it was just so funny. When I started working with you, my daughter was just born. When I finished the project, she started going to school. So it was a bit like this. So everybody had to sort of hold their horses in a way until we got it right and ready. And so this kind of illustrating meant then for him to have multiple rounds of feedback and revisions until everybody in the group was satisfied. At this slow kind of working was not just also a practical requirement. In fact, we thought it was also an ethical imperative. And here ethics, we didn't understand as sort of a tick box exercise before starting a project. But of course, we had received ethical approval from both universities, so Birzeit University and King's College London, to carry out what they considered and is considered high-risk research. It was considered, I don't know if everybody is sort of familiar with the research ethics process here, but it was considered high risk as it involved people with severe mental illness who often face stigma and discrimination in society everywhere in the world, and who are considered less able to give informed consent to participate. So they're often perceived to have less autonomy to make their own decisions. But our project further complicated this because it was so participatory in nature. And the group of people who lived with severe mental illness were hired as researchers rather than participants and informants of the project. At high-risk research usually involves anonymization. Well, but how do you anonymize your co-researchers? How do you anonymize your co-authors when you want to give them due credit for their work and labor? And this latter point was really a sticking point, not only for the ethics board, so they thought it was pretty challenging, but also for the Palestinian Counseling Center and the families of people with severe mental illness. They had tough questions for us. They asked, what does it mean to co-produce research, co-own the data, and publish together? What risks does such work expose people to? What would happen if their real names were to be made public? Would there be social repercussions like ridicule or even violence? These are not easy questions to answer, not easy questions to grapple with. Legally, we were required, therefore, to not only get informed consent from group members, but also their families to be involved in such work. And to say the truth, we really felt quite uncomfortable with this kind of assenting process. We believed that our soon-to-be colleagues should be able to make their decisions autonomously with the support of others, rather than have others decide for them and then be able to sort of assent and say yes or no, but have less of, but their voice would have had less weight. But there was at the time no way around this. The way we then dealt with it in ways that we could live with was to ensure that everyone who was involved was comfortable to participate in the group. And therefore we practiced consenting as a process and not as a tick box exercise at the beginning of the project. So during each meeting, we checked in with people and sort of asked if they were still happy to be part of this project. We repeated the purpose of our joint work regularly, and we made sure that those who wanted a break could take it without feeling excluded. And such breaks could be short, could be just stepping out of the room, taking a coffee, having a smoke, but they could also sometimes last for a couple of weeks, depending on how people were feeling, also in relation to sort of the fluctuation of their mental illness and the severity of the mental illness. And we allowed for these breaks, trying to really make sure that people didn't feel excluded from the process of co-production, and that the door was always open to come back, and everybody came back all the time. So that was nice. Other challenges related to community stigma, and I want to illustrate this by focusing on authorship, community walks that Suzanne was already talking about, and also the awareness raising campaigns that she alluded to. So the authorship itself was another one of these sort of sticking points, and shows that this was some of the challenges that we faced. None of the participants felt, or none of our co-researchers felt comfortable to have their real names mentioned on the cover of the book. So they decided on the group name together and requested pseudonyms. Part of the data collection, as you heard, also involved these community walks. And on these walks, we had initially thought that we could just walk in the community, also in the sort of town center, etc. But people were more careful and wanted to work more around the rehabilitation center, which was located a bit at the outskirts of the town, for their own safety. They wanted to have a nice time, rather than being exposed to stares or nasty commentary. So we reflected on community life somewhat from the margins, and that is, of course, somewhat also ironically. It was therefore a huge step when members decided to expose themselves and their experiences fully to university students, to people at the library, to experts, following the production of our advocacy cards that we just showed you. And during such meetings, some of the group members interacted with people on their own terms. So we didn't rehearse, and I think that's again important. We didn't rehearse these sort of public engagements, telling people this is what you need to do, how you need to behave, this is when you speak, this is when you don't speak, but rather we let it happen and just followed along and saw what happened. And sort of here again, people decided on the spot to go on stage, tell their story, and rather than following a scripted agenda. And this made our interactions all the more authentic and also more powerful. Other practical challenges that we've faced were not so much related to anticipated community stigma, but also mental illness itself. Mental illness, as probably most of you know, fluctuates, and so does the ability to participate, at least among some of our members. And in the book, they themselves reflect on this challenge related to in the relation to communication. And I'm just going to quote what they were saying. They said, "It is important to admit that communication does not come easily to many of us. For those of us with speech problems, it is difficult to articulate words, while others may be more introverted or less able to make sense of what other people say or do." So this meant, however, in no way that people could not contribute to the project or make their own decisions. On the contrary, we had to make sure that contribution was made possible based on these fluctuating abilities. And this is partly, again, sort of to return to the slow working that we talked about. This is just what it took to get it right, to have people included, and then to have the product of this book ready for people like you to explore and read. So we said at the very beginning that we would end the presentation with a bit of a call out to you, to get you engaged here. And this is a call out not just by Jurka, Suzanne, and myself, but really also from the group of friends with mental illness. So we would really appreciate your help with dissemination. So please read the book. It's available online. We can post it again in the chat because I see people are coming in and out, and I don't think Zoom sort of captures it like this. You can ask us for hard copies. So Suzanne can provide you with hard copies if you're based in Palestine, or if you know people in Palestine who would like the book. I'm very happy to send you copies if you're based outside Palestine. The book is for free. However, we do appreciate, if you can, a little donation so that we can keep printing copies and also sending them around. But we also wanted to sort of invite you to, if you enjoyed the talk, the book, if you have other circles in which the book can be presented, we're very happy to hop on another Zoom call, give a presentation, and enter this kind of conversation, because we do believe it is important to disseminate this book, because it was just such, we felt it was just such an important piece to do, enjoy the work together. And it is something that the group of friends of mental illness also asked from us. So we want to live up to this ask as well. So this brings us to an end. We are saying thank you. On the last slide, you will be able to see our contact details, but I'm happy to share them again in the chat as well. So, and now it's over to you with questions, and we'll be happy to join into a conversation with you. Thank you.
To unmute. Thank you so much, Hannah, Jurka, and Suzanne. I think there was such richness and depth and emotional power in what you've been sharing with us. And I'm sure people will have a lot of things they'd like to ask you, but since I'm sharing, I'm going to grab Chair's privilege to start with a couple of thoughts, really, questions. And I suppose one is thinking about the overlap between what people experience when they're diagnosed with a mental illness and the wider conditions in which people are living. So I'm thinking about the lack of voice, or the need to have a voice, and often the deprivation of voice, which is so often experienced by people with mental health issues. And then, of course, the wider question of Palestinians in general being deprived of voice, and issues to do with fear and suspicion in living with mental illness, but also when so much is done to deprive a community of the means of solidarity and the desire to divide people and to make them suspicious of each other as a deliberate policy. So I just wondered whether that kind of overlap between issues that people with mental illness experience and people that are generally living in conditions of occupation with all its dimensions, how much that came up explicitly, or whether you'd each like to comment on that particular element.
Thank you. I wonder if Jörg and Suzanne would like to have a start. Want me to it? I'll give it a start, but then I will roll the ball over to you. Thank you, Win. And absolutely, I think this sort of nexus was felt quite regularly. And I'm just remembering a quote, something that we talked about quite a bit with a group of friends with mental illness, but also with other people who suffer from severe mental illness who we interviewed. And they talked about a triple whammy. So basically saying, we're suffering from the mental illness. This in and of itself is already really tough. Then we suffer from the stigma in our community and inclusion. And we're facing military occupation and violence from the Israeli occupation forces. And that sort of coming together in their lives just made it often really, really difficult. Also living in an area that was often raided and under attack by settlers, and the military was difficult. People often, as Jörg said in the presentation, actually traced the onset of their illness to torture they had experienced in prisons, but also just violence in the streets, beatings, etc. So all this coming together made it very difficult. And as you're saying, then facing in addition sort of exclusion and marginalization from your own community, not being quite allowed to participate, felt then additionally hurtful. So these are sort of initial reflections that I had. Not sure, Jörg, Suzanne, if you want to add.
I think you summarized it well, Hannah. This is the way we heard it from them and what we also experience every day living in the situation.
Maybe if I can just use my chair's position to ask another question, which really interests me. And again, I'm thinking about liberation psychology and some of the ideas that come from the narrative approach to therapy, which is defining people in a particular marginalized group as researchers rather than patients or whatever descriptions get used of them. And I know that this was not intended as a mental health intervention in and of itself, but I wonder if you could say a bit more about whether the experiences of empowerment that might come from producing the book and now putting it out to a wider world, what sort of effects do you feel, what have people said about the effect of that?
Shall I say something about that? When you asked that question, I immediately thought of one of the people in the group. It was actually the same person that I mentioned earlier who said, I don't want to watch television when my family goes to a wedding. And she actually, she was very interactive in the group and she really engaged with us, and she loved coming to the meetings and helping with the research. And I remember so clearly that she said, you know, we just like it when you ask us questions. So this is what came to my mind in answer to your question. So they really enjoyed working with us on this.
Can I just ask you, do you think that, because of course people suffering from mental illness often gets asked a lot of questions, but the questions can be very top down and hierarchical and diagnosing. And I wonder whether you think there's a particular type of question that people really appreciated, and
Yes.
the quality of that might have been different from other questions that they could have been asked.
No, I really think that the type of questions and being taken seriously, not having decisions made for you, but speaking and having people listen to you and making notes of what you say. I think that was something they really, really appreciated.
Yeah, the space, they find their space to talk freely, to share their experiences, to reflect on their experiences. Because we also heard from them that even when they go to the community mental health centers to get their medication, the doctor only, or the psychiatrist only prescribe the medication for them. They don't have communication with the psychiatrist or the social worker there. So they miss communication with people to talk about their problems, their experiences. So our group was the space for them to reflect on this and talk freely also without being judged or stigmatized or feel, they feel also very comfortable with us. From the beginning, they told us that even sometimes at the beginning when they started to meet in the center, that students who came as trainers at the university, because I mean as part of their training at the university, they were even they don't have a good communication with them, and it seems that it was mechanically done, but with us they feel comfortable and they find a good space to talk freely, as I said. And even sometimes they talk small talks with us, side talks, and they wanted to ask us more about our lives. So yeah, it was a very nice and atmosphere for them and for us.
And maybe just to quickly also add that Suzanne said before in the presentation that we actually paid people for their labor. And that was also something that is not necessarily common. And we're just beginning to do this here in the UK. So it was very new to be involved, not just as someone who delivers information, but whose time is really valued. And what we appreciated hugely was that they negotiated their salary up together with their counselor. We had offered something lower. They negotiated it up, and we were so pleased about that, right? So, of course, readily agreed and thought, okay, this also shows that there is a comfortable space where people feel like they can make a really justified demand for better pay and to be respected, and for us then to deliver. So this is sort of another example, I think, of what Suzanne, you were also saying about this sort of space that we created over time.
Thank you so much. I think Eliana wanted to chip in there, and then we have a question from David and a question from Martin. Would you like to raise your issue, Eliana?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just have a reflection. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's great. And the project is just so important. And I was sort of thinking that what makes it different working, the way you are working with people with enduring mental illnesses, is that they're not just you are not just working with mentally ill people, you are just there with human beings, with ordinary people that have other sort of things to offer. You know, that they have ideas, that they have sort of whatever wishes, and that they can contribute. And I think the importance of your project is that you are providing an environment where they can do that, and they're recognized as not just being ill, but just still sort of keeping their humanity. And I think that that is what makes the project so important and wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliana. Did you want to respond to that, any of you?
Thank you. That is such a nice comment of you. And yes, we agree wholeheartedly.
To also say that really the learning, I mean, we just learned so much, not only about their lives, but I think also about us in that process. So I think that made it also so special. So we were all learning, I think, in this, and we were all vulnerable we're able to make ourselves vulnerable in a way without diminishing the power hierarchies that I think, despite this space that we created, we tried to remain aware that the power hierarchies didn't go away no matter what we did. That was also a huge, that is a limitation of all these projects, because I think sort of reflecting back on what Gwyn, you were saying at the beginning, these sort of power structures, they're real, they're tangible, they affect people's lives. And no matter how holistic you try to work, you're not dismantling these power structures as such. So you're working within these power structures, sometimes better, sometimes worse, I guess. So it's really important to us to sort of keep the humility sort of in place and reflect. And maybe a nice sort of side note is that to get to the community center, we always had to take a minibus for about an hour and a half, one way and back. And that gave us a lot of really important space to just reflect of what we heard, what we experienced, where we fell short, sort of thinking about how can we do it differently. So it's sort of these also sort of strange everyday spaces that then created opportunities for sort of thinking more and deeper, and also seeing that, again, appreciating the limitations of our work as well.
Thank you. David Harold has got a question. I wonder if you would just like to ask your question, David. You've written it in the chat, but it would probably be nicer to have it face to face.
Okay. Do you engage with community leaders to help with this problem of overcoming stigma? Because, you know, the problem is not with your researchers, as I like you calling them, it is with the outside community. Do you engage with them? I'm talking about, you know, I mean, in Gaza, for example, we have muhtars and imams and so on that we speak to, and using them as a kind of an educational conduit, if you like.
Sorry, I'm just going to butt in and say that David is the chair of trustees and very deeply involved in the Palestine Trauma Center in Gaza, so that these issues come up a lot. I just wanted to introduce you, David, so that people know who you are. Carry on.
That's my question. Thank you.
Suzanne, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, as we presented that with the advocacy campaigns that we conducted together with them, we tried to reach the community around them, like the public library, university, and also they also distributed individually, each one of them distributed these cards to their surroundings, to people they know, pharmacists, for example. One of them told us that he gave the cards to a pharmacist near to his house. And also, by having now the book, we are, our aim is to have a dissemination of the book to reach wider community, and also schools, principals, teachers, so they could use it as a source for let's say even if it is small change, but it's as a kind of source to hopefully have change or produce change in the community. So yeah, we have this in mind, and they also with the campaigns that they did, where they wanted to vote to reflect on their experiences and also to talk to the wider community, their community at least.
I agree, and I think this is, but at the same time, I also think that there's more work to do for us to sort of as a next step, because one thing that we're thinking about is how do we become not just another research project that is coming to an end and we're just disappearing out of these people's lives. For now, we go and visit whenever, you know, we're together. And that is nice, but it's not the same. And we're thinking of, again, applying for funds to bring us together, to be able to pay also for this labor, to do this kind of advocacy together. Because of course, Suzanne, Yoke and I, we can go and talk to community leaders, but what we really want to do is to do this work together with a group of friends with mental illness, and appreciate their labor as such. And so it is exactly sort of the next step that we are currently thinking about. How can we use this book as a tool to stimulate conversation and rethinking, and also listening again, because again, sort of going back to what Gwyn was saying at the beginning, some of these structures just affect everybody. And the work we did with family members, I think, showed that it was not easy in this context also to care for people with severe mental illness, where there's so little support available. And it falls on their shoulders, often women, to care in very difficult situations, becoming even more difficult when medication is not available, etc. So I think there's a lot more. On the one hand, there's awareness raising to do, but there's also a lot of listening to do. And I think it would be great if we could do that again, sort of as this collective, as this team.
Thank you. Martin, would you like to ask a question?
Just to start by saying how listening to you was evoked a lot of my earlier working experience. When I worked for 10 years in a community mental health resource, actually within walking distance of King's College in the Elephant, which was funded by the psychiatric services, but which was operated on an open door, non-referral basis, and which was staffed by people who came from who were more influenced by kind of anti-psychiatry kind of framework, if you like. And subsequently, after leaving there, I worked as a consultant to the staff at various residential therapeutic communities, where again there's a kind of literature and a framing of the relationship between the institution and how it functions, and the nature of the problems that people perceive to be there for, to try and address. So I was reminded of all this, and was thinking about your interest in linking up with groups, outside or and thinking about the growth of the user movement, which I'm not in touch with anymore, but during the 1990s was more kind of connected to, and I'm thinking of things like the Hearing Voices Network and so on. So I don't know quite what their outlook is now, but I think at the time it was quite often advanced in opposition to the notion of mental illness. So I'm sort of wondering a bit about the framing of the work that you're doing, and how much it sort of both facilitates or perhaps might get in the way of connecting with kind of like-minded projects and groups outside. So I'm interested in whether that you've attempted to connect with Mind and these kind of organizations, which presumably exist in other places as well. And a second kind of question was whether there's a within BIRSITE or within PCC, within the Palestine Counselling Centre, whether there's a sort of an interest or a connectedness with this kind of literature on on different ways of perceiving mental ill health, and whether there's an Arab tradition, whether within the Arab world there's also a tradition of different ways of perceiving mental illness, either in traditional sort of forms or in more sort of anti-medic, contrary to the medical model, if you like, alternatives to the medical model that are current and being explored.
Thank you. So I think the first part of the question is sort of quite sort of UK informed, and I'm very happy to take that on, and then Suzanne maybe and Joke, the second question, wondering if we should turn it around, and Suzanne and Joke, if you would like to tackle the second question first, and then I'll come in with the first, because I think there were some organizations mentioned that you may or may not be familiar with.
I'm not so sure about the like the organizations that also advocate against the use of medication for mental health problems. In our group, we had, for example, one person who had, together with his family, decided no longer to take the medication, and he seemed to be reasonably well. But most of the people were really very concerned about the availability of medication when they needed it. I think we should maybe have somebody of PCC who might know a bit more about these things. I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to add something.
I think with mental illness, with severe mental illness medication, I think they, as you said, yani, as we know that they give medications, but maybe for psychosocial problems, like the stress, they try to, the organization, they use different techniques with the people who suffer from stress, for example, psychosocial problems. But with mental illness or with severe mental illness, I think the medication is the prevailing, let's say, or from what I know, that they always prescribe medications. But as Joke said, also some people may feel okay without medication, but some may have relapses without taking medication. So it depends, maybe.
And maybe also thinking, I think there is this academic discourse also in the region, and I mean, Rita Jakaman and colleagues have contributed to that sort of reframing mental illness, thinking about mental distress and also illness outside the biomedical model, thinking about local idioms of distress and ways in which they then engender different forms of help and health seeking, and ways in which people then also respond to treatment. But to some extent, it is an academic discourse, and the way it translates into actual practice on the ground, there's a real divide. You can see some of these interlinkages, for example, with the Palestinian Counseling Center, who are very much part of these kind of, well, also political discourse, sort of understanding mental health as something that's more than a medical matter, but something that is social, something that is political, something that is economic. But then in the Ministry of Health and sort of conventional mental health care, these discourses are less prevalent. And it's not a lack of awareness necessarily of these discourses, but also really constrained resources that just make alternative forms of treatment extraordinarily challenging. And I mean, we have done quite a bit of participant observation in clinical settings, and people, and I don't know if Joke and Suzanne would agree, but I thought people were giving their utmost and just their very best in many cases. But that very best had a very limited reach, simply because there was not enough staff, not enough resources, the medication's not available, no time for other forms of support. Would you agree, or am I?
No, I agree with you totally. Yeah, right. Thank you for your additions. Yeah.
Yeah, and connected to the first part of the question, I think what you're saying about connecting to some of these projects internationally, and also Vivian, thank you for these suggestions in the chat, would be really important, because what we did, and that we didn't say before, that a parallel project with very similar questions took place in Ghana, led by our Ghanaian colleagues, Lily Kapobe and Ursula Reed and others, who asked very similar questions, did a very similar project in Ghana, and where we compared findings and are publishing together. So that is quite interesting. We also had a lived experience advisory board here in the UK, so of people with mental illness, and they provided us initially with really important advice as well of how to maybe do a project like this that is respectful, not paternalistic, especially giving us confidence to move slowly, to provide open spaces for people to come in and leave, something that can make you, when you haven't done this kind of work before, maybe can feel quite stressful when people walk out on you, and to sort of, but to allow for that space, to actually build that into your work rather than being caught off guard. So some of these conversations we had, but I think that could also, again, be, it's an invitation, I think, for us to think about how to connect to other similar projects, programs of work outside of Palestine, but also maybe in the 48 area, East Jerusalem, in Gaza, for example, if there are projects or similar initiatives happening, to link up a lot more. So these kind of conversations and questions, I think, are really helpful for us, and it's stimulating to think how and where to take this further. So thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on that, and perhaps related to Martin's question. And I was thinking about that all of us are living in a neoliberal context where mental health, along with everything else, is marketized, and where the atomized individual, as opposed to the social collective, is what is framed in relation to mental health. And I was thinking about the kind of question of how connectivity and solidarity are counteractions to that. And maybe also thinking about some of the research that I think has been done in Gaza about participating in resistance is good for your mental health, even though it may be challenging to your physical safety. And I'm just wondering whether those kinds of questions have come up about, agency in relation to resistance, and how that, and solidarity in relation to resistance, and how that impacts upon people's experiences of mental well-being.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, of course, you're absolutely right. And I think the sort of notion of around solidarity was a bit of a fraught concept or idea, because I think people felt there was not necessarily a whole lot of solidarity, partly within their own communities with them. At the same time, I do believe, and Suzanne and Joke come in on this, that especially the men had a lot of stories about connected to their own involvement in the resistance and standing up and being proactive. Also memories from when they were younger, if they were, for example, older, also before their mental illness. I think that's also something really important. People, of course, had lives without severe mental illness as well, and remembering those times and what it meant to be part of the community and to resist and partly to fight the occupation. And I think these memories were really quite cherished, and sometimes also painful to think about how life was before the onset of the mental illness and how it just turned everything so upside down. And yet a lot of these structures, for example, the occupation did actually not change. In fact, it has become worse over the years. And I think people were, anyone who participated in the project, whether as researchers or participants, were really reflective of the political impact that the occupation had on their health and just their ability to participate and move. But maybe Joke, Suzanne.
Yeah, I'm just thinking with this question about a professor who got in touch with us. She's teaching in Qatar and she's teaching social work, and she used a book in one of her courses, in the course Social Work in Mental Health Settings. And she said her students were very engaged, and they did not only learn about how the Palestinian community deals with mental illness. I'm actually reading from her message to me. But she says they also learned more about the Palestinian context, which is to such a large extent determined by the Israeli military occupation. And so I think our co-researchers did such a great job in making both these points about their life in the community, but also about how the occupation impacts it. And so also thinking back to the question by David, how we engage with community leaders or religious, educational family. I think the book cries for being used more, and it could be such an educational resource for psychology students in Palestine, but also in the rest of the Arab world. And I think we need to work more on that, and I hope we will, but we also need help. So anybody who has ideas, I welcome them to get in touch, to tell your friends, if you know people who are teaching social work, mental health, tell them about this book. We haven't made it for nothing. These people worked so hard on it with us. Sorry to take so much time.
The book is, of course, in Arabic, isn't it?
No, it's also in English.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's also in
Yes,
both.
yes, both.
Yeah, so it's a huge resource that can be, yeah. Martin, you wanted to add something?
I just thought that might be a good moment to mention this other project, which, I think it links to this idea about amplifying the voices of people with mental ill health and people who are working with people or living with people. I'm going to put 3 links into the chat. One of them is to a YouTube film that was made a few years ago by the Wellcome Institute, I believe, just about people reflecting on something about their lives on one particular day of the year. But it's the model for another project that they're making, which is called I hope this helps, something like that. I hope this helps, where they're inviting people from all across the world in any language to share reflections on mental health or living with mental ill health or something that's contributed to their mental health. And there's one of the links is to the website, and the other one, if it works, is to instructions on how to upload, how to create a message that can be uploaded. It just feels that the groups that you're talking about, it might be a really relevant. I've already been talking to people at PCC and the Gaza Community Mental Health Project and other people to try and ensure that there's a strong Palestinian representation on the film that they eventually release. Because the first film, as I say, one of these links is to the first film. I think it's a lovely film. So I'll just put that in the chat.
Oh, great.
I thank you for that. I've saved the chat, so I hope that means I can is saving the Hannah asked me to save the chat because people had so many interesting comments that she'd like to look at, and if I've just pressed save chat, will that have done it? Is that all I need to do? Just so that I don't think I've done it and then I've completely failed to. Okay, thanks. I guess I just had another question. It made me think a lot about what feedback do people who contribute to a meeting such as this get, and what might they like to get, and how could their contribution, their research, their expertise, how could a group like this demonstrate that how we valued it? Is there a way in which we can give some feedback?
I think this is really lovely, and there are two ways. So one way is very simple, sort of an email message, and well, Suzanne, I volunteer you will translate it, and it will be read out through the counselor to the group, and that can be done, that can be done next week, so to speak, so quite immediately. But then we also have on the website 3 interactive questions. So we have, if you open the website, you will see that there is the PDF document of the book, and then below there are 3 interactive questions where people can reflect on the book. And again, you can reflect in English or Arabic. If it's in English, we will translate it. Well, I say we. And we sort of on a regular basis forward these sort of comments to the group as well. And we have been in sessions where we've then read out these comments, and people were really quite touched, because there is a bit of a, I think, frustration also involved, that people say, yes, we have done this work, we're sending it out, but then actually it gets nowhere and people will not engage with it because there is this stigma, and so feel a bit frustrated about this. So, but whenever we come back and show, well, actually people appreciated this work and have learned from you, and this is what they're saying, this does mean a lot, because it's sometimes very difficult to see something travel when everything is just so online and nobody comes and speaks to you directly about it. So it's a really nice idea. So yes, I will put the website again into the chat. There are these 3 questions, and yes, email us.
Thank you very much for doing that. And meanwhile, David would like to make another contribution. Do you want to go ahead, David?
Yeah, thank you, Gwyn. And this business of us communicating with each other and not losing this contact, I think, is hugely important. We're all trying to do the same thing. In fact, I noticed one of your pictures looked exactly like one of the techniques that we use in Gaza, which is called focusing. I think you have a ball of string and you just throw it to each other and hold the string, and it all becomes enmeshed, so you're all together, Yeah, and there's more to it than that, but that was the picture I saw. We ought to at least know of each other's existence. I mean, we don't know what will come of it, but one of the things, of course, is that we have our email contacts and we can share our events if we have another webinar and so on. And I think we should get to know each other better by attending each other's online events. I don't know if you can reach it, but you've got PalestineTraumaCentre.uk, that's us.
So it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Hannah, Yoka and Suzanne. I think it's a wonderful presentation. It was so rich and just beautiful. And please thank all the researchers who made it possible. So many, many thanks. And let's just unmute and give you a round of applause. And we'll be in touch around future Cafe Palestines when we've been able to organize them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been so fantastic.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you.